The moving truck was already in the driveway when Walter Hendricks pulled up to the curb, and for a moment, he just sat there with his hands on the wheel, watching two men in matching blue polos carry his recliner out the front door like it was nothing, like it was furniture, like it hadn't been the last thing his wife ever picked out before the cancer took her. His son Derek stood on the porch, arms crossed, jaw tight the way it got when he was bracing for a fight he'd already decided to win. "Dad," Derek's voice carried down the walkway, flat and rehearsed. "We need to talk." Walter got out slowly, 67 years old, and his knees reminded him of it every time he stood up too fast, but he didn't let it show, not in front of Derek, and especially not in front of Renee, who was watching from the doorway with her arms folded and her chin lifted like she'd already won something. "Talk about what?" Walter said. "Talk about why my chair is on the lawn." "That's not. Nobody's touching your chair. That's the guest room stuff. Or just..." Derek stopped himself, took a breath, and Walter recognized the gesture. Renee had taught him that. Center yourself before you deliver bad news, like it was a sales pitch instead of a life. "Dad, you need to apologize to Renee." Walter looked past his son to the woman on the porch, and something in his chest went very still and very cold. "Apologize for what?" "You know what you said to her mother. At dinner. You know exactly what you said." "I said her mother shouldn't have called my late wife a..." "Dad," Derek's voice cracked, just slightly, the way it used to when he was 9 years old and about to cry over something he was too proud to cry over. "You apologize, or you find somewhere else to live. I mean it this time." The two movers kept working, indifferent, sliding a dolly under the bookshelf that used to sit in Walter's own den in the house he used to own, the house he had sold 3 years ago, at his son's urging, to help make the down payment on this one. The house where Derek and Renee now lived. The house where Walter had been sleeping in the converted sunroom for 18 months, ever since his hip surgery made the stairs at his old apartment impossible. "You're evicting your father," Walter said. "Over dinner conversation. I'm asking you to have some respect for my wife." "I had respect for your wife until she stood in my kitchen and told my dead wife's sister that Margaret drank herself into that hospital bed." Something flickered across Derek's face. Doubt, maybe, or memory, but Renee's voice cut through it before it could take root. "That's not what I said, Derek. You know that's not." "He's twisting it. He always twists things." "I'm not twisting anything," Walter said quietly. "I was standing right there." Derek looked between his father and his wife, and Walter watched his son do the thing he had been doing for 2 years now. Ever since the wedding. Watched him fold himself smaller, watched him choose the easier piece over the harder truth, because the easier piece was the one that got him through the evening, without a fight, in his own living room. "Apologize," Derek said again, and this time it wasn't a request. "Or you can stay at a hotel tonight. I already talked to a lawyer. We're well within our rights." Walter felt something in his chest that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, but sat somewhere in the space between them, old and familiar, like a door he thought he'd shut for good finally swinging open again. "A lawyer," Walter repeated. "Renee's cousin. He does real estate law. He said since you're not on the deed and there's no formal lease, you're basically a..." Derek hesitated over the word. "A guest," Renee finished from the porch, and there was something almost satisfied in the way she said it. Walter looked at his son for a long moment. Then he nodded, slow and deliberate, the way he used to nod at a job site right before he told a crew they'd have to redo a wall, because the studs weren't plumb. "All right," he said. "Give me a few days to make arrangements." "You have until Friday," Derek said, and Walter could hear, underneath the hardness, how much his son hated saying it. Walter didn't argue. He got back in his truck, and he drove to the only place that made sense anymore, which was the small office above the hardware store downtown, where a woman named Priscilla Voss had handled his affairs since Margaret's diagnosis 11 years ago. He didn't know yet exactly what he was going to do. He only knew, with the calm certainty of a man who had spent 40 years reading blueprints and knowing exactly where the load-bearing walls were, that his son had just made a mistake he didn't understand the size of. 3 years earlier, when Derek first brought up the house, Walter had been sitting at his kitchen table, the same kitchen table, sold now, sitting in someone else's dining room, going through Margaret's old recipe boxes because he couldn't sleep, and it was the only thing that made the silence bearable. Derek had knocked at 10 at night, which wasn't like him, and when Walter opened the door his son looked the way he used to look before big exams. Nervous, hopeful, wanting something and ashamed of wanting it. "I found a house," Derek had said. "It's perfect. Renee loves it. But we're short on the down payment. And I know it's a big ask, Dad, but how short? 40, maybe 45. Walter hadn't hesitated, not because he had that kind of money sitting loose in a checking account, but because he had a house of his own that was too big and too quiet and too full of a life that didn't exist anymore. And because his son's face had looked, for one moment, like it had before Margaret got sick, before everything got heavy. "I'll sell the house," Walter had said. "Dad, no, I wasn't asking you to. I know what you were asking. I'm telling you what I'm doing." He'd looked at his son, this grown man standing in the doorway of the house he grew up in, and something in Walter had wanted, more than anything, to give him one good thing before it was too late to matter. "Your mother would want this. She'd want you settled." They'd worked it out over the following months, quietly, through a family attorney named Roland Absher, who Walter had known since they'd served on a construction arbitration board together 15 years back. Walter would put in $60,000 toward the down payment and closing costs. In exchange, he would retain a documented equitable interest in the property, a private agreement, notarized, recorded but not publicly filed as a lien, structured the way Roland had explained so it wouldn't complicate Derek and Renee's mortgage approval. Walter would also reserve, in writing, a right of residency, the ability to live in the home rent-free, in a designated space, for as long as he wished, or until the arrangement was formally dissolved by mutual written consent. "It's not about not trusting him," Walter had told Roland at the time. "It's about being smart. I've seen good families come apart over money that was never put on paper." "Smart is exactly the word," Roland had said. "Most fathers just hand over the check and hope." Derek had signed the agreement without much comment, the way people sign things they don't expect to matter, a formality, background noise to the excitement of new floors and a bigger yard. Walter doubted his son remembered the specifics anymore. He doubted Renee had ever read it at all. Walter had never planned to use it as anything but insurance. He'd imagined, if he ever needed it, it might come up in some quiet, dignified conversation about long-term care, decades down the road. Not, he thought now, sitting in Priscilla's office with the folder open in front of him. Not this. Not a woman standing on a porch calling him a guest. Priscilla read through the documents twice, her reading glasses pushed low on her nose, humming faintly the way she did when something interested her. "This is airtight, Walter. Roland doesn't do sloppy work." She looked up. "You understand what this means, though? If you enforce this, it's not going to be a quiet conversation anymore. I know. Derek could lose the house. Not lose it to you. But if this comes out the way it's written, and depending on how Renee's family reacts, it could blow the whole thing up. Marriages don't always survive finding out one partner tried to throw the other's father out onto the street." Walter looked down at his hands, at the calluses that never fully went away no matter how many years since he'd swung a hammer for a living. "I'm not trying to blow anything up," he said. "I'm trying to remind my son what I gave him. And I'm trying to remind that young woman that this isn't her house to hand out eviction notices in. There's a difference," Priscilla said carefully, "between reminding someone and destroying them. You've got the power to do either right now. Which one are you actually after?" Walter thought about the recliner sitting out on the lawn. He thought about Margaret picking it out at the furniture store 11 years ago, sitting in it herself first to test the give of the cushion, laughing at him because he kept saying it was fine, just pick one, and she'd said, "Walter Hendricks, you will sit in this chair for the rest of your life, so we are doing this properly." "I want them to understand," Walter said finally, "that respect isn't optional just because somebody's inconvenient." Priscilla nodded slowly and closed the folder. "Then let's build this the right way, not to humiliate anybody, to make sure the truth is impossible to ignore." The days before Friday moved strangely, the way days do when a decision is already made but the world hasn't caught up to it yet. Walter stayed with his old army friend Nolan Presley, sleeping on a pull-out couch that smelled like cedar and cigarette smoke from decades ago. And every night Nolan asked him the same question in a different way. "You sure about this?" "I'm sure. Because you could just apologize. 2 sentences. It costs you nothing." "It costs me everything," Walter said. "It's not the words, Nolan. It's what saying them means. It means she was right to say it. It means Margaret deserved what she said about her." Nolan didn't push after that. He just poured 2 fingers of bourbon neither of them really wanted, and sat with Walter in the quiet the way old friends do when there's nothing useful left to say. Meanwhile, at the house, things were unraveling faster than Derek expected. Renee had told her sister the story with visible pride. My husband finally set a boundary, and her sister had told their mother, and their mother, who had actually been in the room the night of the disputed comment, had called Renee in a fury. You told them I said what? You basically said it, Mom. Don't act like. I said your mother-in-law's passing was hard on everybody, and Walter got upset because he thought I was minimizing it, and I apologized right there at the table. What is wrong with you? Turning that into some justification to throw an old man out of his home. Renee, for the first time since the confrontation, felt something shift under her feet, some certainty she hadn't examined closely enough starting to crack. She didn't tell Derek about the call. Not yet. On Thursday evening, Roland Absher called Derek directly, his voice even and professional in the specific way that makes a person's stomach drop before they've even processed what's being said. Derek, I'm calling as your father's attorney, and also, frankly, as someone who's known you since you were in Little League. So take this in the spirit it's meant. I need to schedule a formal meeting for tomorrow regarding the property at 214 Lotfield Drive. Formal meeting about what? About the equitable interest and residency agreement your father holds in the property. I assume you've forgotten the details, so I'll give you the short version tonight so you're not blindsided tomorrow. Your father has a recorded legal right to reside in that home. He also holds a documented financial stake based on his contribution to the down payment. Evicting him without cause and without addressing the underlying agreement isn't something you're legally able to do. There was a long silence on the line. That's not. He never said anything about. Dad wouldn't do that to me. He's not doing anything to you, Derek. He's protecting an agreement you both signed 3 years ago. I have the documents right here. I can email them to you tonight if you'd like to review them before tomorrow. Derek sat down heavily on the stairs of the house he thought was entirely his, staring at nothing. And for the first time in the whole ugly week, he felt the true weight of what he had actually said to his father on that porch. Renee found him there 20 minutes later, still sitting on the stairs, phone loose in his hand. What happened? He told her. All of it. The down payment, the $60,000, the agreement, the lawyer, the meeting tomorrow. Renee's face went through several expressions in quick succession: confusion, disbelief, and finally something closer to shame, though she wasn't ready yet to call it that out loud. He never told us any of that, she said. Would it have mattered? Derek's voice was quieter than she'd heard it in months. Would you have talked to him differently if you knew he basically bought us this house? That's not fair. None of this has been fair, Renee. Not to him. Derek pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. He gave up his whole life to get us here, and I told him to apologize or leave, like he was some tenant who paid his rent late. Renee sat down beside him on the step, quiet for a long moment. My mom called me tonight, she admitted. Before your lawyer did. She said I never should have let it get that far. That I turned an uncomfortable comment into a war. She looked at her hands. I think I wanted to be right more than I wanted to be fair. Derek didn't answer right away. Outside, a car passed, headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling before disappearing. We need to fix this, he said. Before tomorrow. Not because of a lawyer, because of what we actually did. Friday morning, Walter arrived at Roland's office in his good jacket, the one he wore to funerals and depositions, and found Derek and Renee already seated at the small conference table, both of them looking like they hadn't slept. Roland handled the introductions with careful neutrality, laid out copies of the original agreement, and let the silence stretch for a moment before Derek spoke first. Dad, I need to say something, and I need you to actually let me say it, even if it's hard to hear. Walter folded his hands on the table and waited. I was wrong, Derek said. Not about. I'm not saying Renee's mom was completely in the right that night either. There's stuff that we still need to work through as a family. But I was wrong to stand on that porch and give you an ultimatum like you were some. Like you hadn't given us everything. I let Renee's anger become my anger without ever asking what you actually needed. I let this house make me forget what it cost you to give it to us. Renee's hands were tight together in her lap. I said something about Margaret I shouldn't have said, she said quietly. I was defending my mom without thinking about what it would sound like to you. I'm sorry. Not because a lawyer showed up, because it was true before that, and I didn't want to admit it. Walter looked at both of them for a long moment. He thought about Margaret, about the recliner sitting out on a lawn, about the strange dignity of an old man's silence when he finally has the power to say something and chooses, instead, to listen first. "I'm not interested in punishing either of you," Walter said finally. "I built this agreement because I've watched too many families lose everything over money nobody wrote down. I never wanted to use it. I wanted it there in case I needed protecting, not in case I needed a weapon." "So what do you want?" Derek asked, and for the first time all week, it sounded like an honest question instead of a demand. Walter considered it. "I want my chair back inside," he said. "I want dinner at that table sometimes, the way it used to be, without walking on eggshells about your mother's memory. And I want us to actually sit down as a family, all three of us, maybe your mother-in-law too, if she's willing, and talk about what happened that night, honestly, instead of turning it into a fight about locks and leases." Renee nodded, eyes wet. "I can do that." Roland cleared his throat gently. "For what it's worth, the agreement stays in place regardless. That was never in question. But how you three choose to live with each other, that's the part no contract can fix." Walter almost smiled at that, the first real loosening in his chest all week. "No," he agreed. "That part's on us." It took months, not days, for things to fully settle. An uncomfortable dinner with Renee's mother where old grievances got aired more honestly than they had in years. A hard conversation between Derek and Walter late one night on the back porch about all the ways grief makes people say things they don't mean. A slow rebuilding of trust that Renee approached the way she approached everything, methodically, determined not to make the same mistake twice. But the recliner went back inside that same Friday afternoon, carried in by the same two movers who'd carried it out, and that evening Walter sat in it for the first time in a week, feeling the particular give of the cushion that Margaret had tested herself all those years ago. And for a little while, in that quiet room, it felt almost like coming home.